Today, we've got startling new figures out this morning on the opioid crisis and its impact. The National Center for Health Statistics reports there were more than 63,600 drug overdose deaths in the United States in 2016, not even 2017. Of those, of the 63,600, 42,249 involved opioids. That is 2/3 of all drug-related deaths. In addition, the 28% increase in opioid deaths from the previous year. Because of that, the average life expectancy in the United States dropped for the second straight year. You see the numbers there on life expectancy, 78.6 in 2016, down from 78.7 in 2015, which is a big point drop from 78.9 in 2014. Joining me live is former Democratic Congressman Patrick Kennedy. He's a member of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis. Former Congressman, good to see you. Alarming, disturbing numbers. 2/3 of all drug overdose deaths were opioid-related deaths, and opioid-related deaths increased 28% in a year. I would have thought that by 2016 we were starting to move in the right direction on this.
Ali, this isn't news. For anyone paying attention, this has been going on for years. What is news is that everyone's taking a victory lap on the tax cut while we have this epidemic on our hands that requires an emergency response. And yet we can give $1.5 trillion in tax cuts, and yet we're only spending $500 million a year to address a crisis that's taking more lives, much more than what we ever lost during the height of the AIDS epidemic, when we were spending $24 billion a year. For the AIDS epidemic, we're only spending $500 million a year. Ali, you cannot make this up.
Right.
It is startling.
So people who tell me about what the problems are, how you actually address this on the ground, tell me that part of the problem is we don't have an infrastructure that necessarily deals with this, and that the healthcare infrastructure was sort of part of why this problem developed. So what are we looking to do? Where should, if we could triple the money that we spend on this or quadruple it, where would it go? How would it actually stop these deaths? Because the CDC report indicates that overdose deaths were up by double digits for all age groups, from 15 to 24 at the bottom to 65 and older.
First, Ali, let me just say we know what to do. I've been at this for a long time. I've talked to all the experts. I just want to reassure the public watching this. We have the answers. The thing that's missing, Ali, is the political will to address this. Okay? First and foremost, people need to be connected to health care. You can't manage an addiction, which, by the way, is like any other chronic illness, like diabetes or asthma or any cardiovascular disease. You do it by connecting people to treatment. Now, what kind of treatment? We need to revamp the way we think of treatment. 12-step programming is great, but it isn't perfect. And what we need to do is address the opioid use disorder as its own crisis, not just an addiction crisis. We know that opiate replacement therapy is the best course of treatment. So what do we need to do? We need to give people the kind of inoculations that we would give them if this were a Zika virus or influenza and we had an inoculation. We would give it to people. The fact is, Ali, thanks to the FDA, we have an inoculation. It'll curb cravings and it'll prevent overdoses. But what do we need to do, Ali? We need to get more physicians in this country to give that shot. What's the problem? The problem is they don't want to do it because they're worried about the DEA over their shoulder. The irony, Ali, is that they could write scripts for OxyContin and have no DEA oversight for the most part. But if they write a treatment for an opioid use disorder, like buprenorphine, they have the DEA breathing down their backs. There is something perverse about the response that we have in the medical community.
Is that a DEA directive then? Is it an administration directive through Health and Human Services to say, do this?
So what we need to do is do a number of things, but we know what those things are. We need to give a special opiate use disorder code code through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The president ought to bring in all the health insurance companies and say, listen, you folks have to step it up here. This is crucial to our national interests. In other words, we just need an all-hands-on-deck approach. And the first and foremost is we need to get the money out there through expansion of Medicaid, because, frankly, you cannot connect people to care if they don't have health insurance. So, and we know how to do this with Medicaid, and that's what we ought to do. But we shouldn't be paying for detoxes, because detoxes, frankly, increase the rate of death. The irony is, Ali, we're spending a lot of money on the wrong forms of treatment, and instead we ought to be spending the money on what we know works.
All right, well, that is a hopeful message in the light of a very devastating report. Former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.